Let's talk about live vocals. I recently posted some stuff on social media and I got a whole bunch of questions about my live vocal chain, so I thought today I would just walk you through it. If you're new to my website or YouTube channel or finding me on social media, my name is Dave Stagl. I'm a mix engineer based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And in addition to working here in my Dolby Atmos equipped studio, I also do a lot of live sound. And today, that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. So live vocals are a little different for me, the way I would approach them compared to mixing here in my studio. When I'm mixing live, I feel like there is a lot more kind of management of problem areas and problem frequencies, especially as our sound pressure levels, they start to go up. Things can get real harsh real fast. There's also other challenges because live sound is mostly mono, unless you're working in an immersive setup like D&B Soundscape or El Acoustic Eliza today. It's still mostly mono, and maybe that's a discussion for another time, but really it's pretty much mono. So we're stacking a whole lot of sounds together in that mono mix, and it adds some challenges. So today I'm just going to talk about what is my current live vocal chain in 2023. I changed this up a lot over time, but some of it is fairly consistent, and I'm going to talk about what I'm using today and maybe more importantly, why I'm using certain things and some of the thinking behind why I chose to do certain things in certain orders. Because I think the signal flow order of processing is really important. In fact, that's one of the things that irritates me about a lot of the modern digital audio consoles. A lot of these consoles are getting a lot of great features on there right now, but we're still pretty limited in terms of how we can structure the signal flow internally. So that's part of why I still like using some kind of an outboard processing. In this case, I'm using Waves Super Rack and a bunch of Waves plugins. One thing I want to mention about the signal chain, this is not like a right or wrong kind of thing. This is just the way I've been doing it. And honestly, I change this up probably all the time, or, you get bored, you want to try something different, you want a new sound. I mean, the sound of today is not the sound of 10 years ago. So I change things. So please don't look at this as like, this is like the holy grail of vocal chains, because I don't think it is. Maybe it gives you some ideas of some things to try, things to change around, but don't think that like this is it. This is just one approach. There are probably hundreds of approaches, and this is just what works for me. So let's take a look at my signal chain. First up, something you're not going to see is I always EQ on the console. I do high pass filter on the console. For me, it's a workflow thing. I do a lot of EQing. EQing is like next to riding a fader. EQ is the most important thing to me, and I need the fastest, easiest access to it, and doing it on the console, as far as I've found so far, it is always the fastest way. So now let's move over to Super Rack and take a look at my chain. So first thing you'll see in this chain is I have Waves Real-Time Tune in here. Tuning vocals, not as controversial as it used to be, still a little controversial. I've changed my philosophy on doing it a lot over the years. Most of the vocalists I work with here in Atlanta, for them live in the room, they really don't need this. That's not why I usually have this in there. I mean, if somebody, every once in a while, somebody is going to have a bad day and I will turn it on for that reason. But really the main reason I put this in here is because a lot of times the mixes I'm doing, they're going out live for broadcast. And sometimes what works in the room, what's okay in the room, it's not quite as refined online. So I just use Waves Real-Time Tune just to kind of refine people's performance so that someone who's listening, they can connect with the song, they can connect with the emotion of it, and they're not worrying about, or they're not noticing anyways that like, ooh, that note was a little bit off. Because the thing with pitch correction, any of the automatic stuff, it's not usually really fast. It doesn't know what the correct note is supposed to be. It just knows what's the closest note or what's the closest quote unquote legal note in the scale if you're setting it to the scale of the song or the key of the song. But other than that, it doesn't know what the right note is. So if somebody is way off, it's just going to pull towards the closest note. And in a lot of ways, when somebody is missing notes and you're using some kind of automatic pitch correction, you just pull it more to the wrong note. It's like you make them more wrong by using it. So it's not this magic bullet to fix a lot of problems. I think the pitch correction with the vocalists I work with, it helps them out a little bit for online so that they sound good online, because these are my friends and I want them to sound great in the room and outside of the room. So that's why I have a little bit of pitch correction in there. If somebody asks me to turn it off, I just turn it off. I'm not married to it, but I have it in there. I put it at the top of the chain for an important reason. One of the things I found is when you have a vocalist on a loud stage, or maybe there's a vocalist who doesn't necessarily have the most powerful voice relative to all of the ambience around them on the stage, from PA bleed to backline, acoustic drums, guitar amps, any of that kind of stuff on there. When there is a lot of that on stage in the microphone, that kind of stuff can tend to make any pitch correction go really wacky and to do weird things to that background noise. And when you start adding compression to a vocal, it just brings all of that background noise up, so it has a tendency sometimes to make the tuning go really squirrely. So I like to put the tuning at the top of the chain because then it's before any compression. Another reason why I do it there is because in a studio mix environment, like where I'm sitting today, if we were going to be tuning a vocal for a mix, we would tune the vocal before we mix. So it's just, to me, it's just something that is supposed to be done very early in the whole process. So I put it at the top of my chain. Next in my chain is PSE, or the primary source expander. This is, I wouldn't call it a gate. I mean, it is kind of an expander. I use it for basically reducing any kind of stage ambience. The room I work in a lot here in Atlanta is Decatur City Church, and it's not the biggest stage in the world. It's a good sized stage. It's a good sized room. There is very little acoustic treatment in the room. The back wall of the stage is treated, but the rest of the room doesn't really have any treatment. So ambience can get a little crazy at times in there. PSE just helps kind of clean some of that stuff up for me. Next in my chain is max volume. Max volume is kind of like having 3 compressors in one. There's the high level compression section. This is very similar to the RVox compressor. It kind of works like a traditional compressor. Then there is a leveler, which we don't see a lot of in plugin form, unfortunately. Kind of think of that as like a slow kind of compressor. And then they have the low level section. And it's similar to having parallel compression kind of basically built into it. I've been using max volume for, I think I figured out, it was about 10 years. I got turned on to it after I saw John Cooper use it on Bruce Springsteen. I actually wrote an article for Waves. I'll put a link to it below in the description. Talks about how I set this up and use it. This is kind of my general compressor. I don't like hitting this real hard. So it's just kind of basic sort of compression for vocals, get the dynamics, get them leveled out a little bit, make them sound more professional. So one other thing I really like on max volume is this gate. A lot of times I will use this with no PSE. It's not a hard gate. It's similar to the gate that's in RVox, which is really kind of a soft gate, and it's pretty smooth, and I think it works really good on vocals. This gate is usually my first choice for cleaning up ambience. On most stages, that's all I really need. The PSA that I have in front of it, that's usually only when I need some extra, I need a little bit of extra muscle, I guess. I could put it after max volume, but then any of the ambience that max volume brings up from the compression, the PSE is going to fight that. So that's part of why I have them in this particular order. Next in my chain is my de-esser. Right now I'm using Sibilance. I've also used the Renaissance de-esser. If Sibilance doesn't work, I'll use Renaissance de-esser. If that doesn't work, I'll just use the standard Waves de-esser. I haven't really found a one-size-fits-all de-esser for live. I have one that I really like in Pro Tools, which is the Massey de-esser. I still love that thing to death. But for live use, the de-essers on consoles just, they are so disappointing. I'm just going to say it. They're, So I use a plugin for de-essing all the time because they work better. One thing I should mention, I have this de-essing after the compression and also any kind of dynamic equalization. I put these things after the compression because they are threshold based. And part of the thing you run into, if it's threshold based, the dynamics of the signal that are going into it are really important. And de-essing is a good example of where this matters. When people start whispering, their sibilance tends to get exaggerated. So as people get quieter and are talking quieter, sometimes it gets worse. Their sibilance just gets worse. If I put the de-esser in front of my compression, what I'm going to end up having to do is I'm going to have to lower the threshold a lot lower so that my de-essing works on those quieter passages and quieter sections when somebody's singing. And then when they start belting and getting loud and getting up into the sweet spot of their register maybe, now all of a sudden the de-essing is overcooked. So I always put anything that is threshold based, I want to get it after my dynamics processing, or my main kind of dynamics processing. Next up is my dynamic equalization. Right now I'm using F6, which I love. I usually have and even with a lot of the plugins in this chain, a lot of times I have a preset that says start over, which basically kind of wipes everything. In the case of F6, it sets the range at I think it's -6. I think it speeds up the attack on every band, maybe closer to 10 or 8 or something like that. Make it so it gets it a little faster, gets it so it can work, so I can just kind of find the frequency and then adjust the threshold and take it down. So dynamic EQ, this is really important to me with live vocals because people are not consistent in mic technique and where they're standing relative to the mic. And tonally, vocalists, they change a lot. It's live. It's a lot of moving targets. It's not quite the same as being in a studio. I use dynamic equalization here working in the studio, but I use it a lot more in a live scenario. Sometimes if F6 isn't getting me the results I want, I will go back to the C6 because I've used that for a very, very long time. And the presets that I made, 10, 12 years ago, they all still work really good. So I'll go to that if F6 doesn't work. All right, next up is something that is new for me this year. I've been starting to put a CLA 76 kind of towards the end of the chain. This sort of came because I've been wanting my vocals to sound maybe a little more compressed, a little less dynamic live. I don't want to squash them to death with it, but I just wanted things sounding maybe a little bit more like they do in the studio. Because, over the last, 6, 7, 8 years, where I've been spending more and more time in the studio, I almost always have some kind of an 1176 style of compressor on the vocal, and I'm just kind of used to the sound of that. So I just started adding it live. It's at the end of my chain. I just set it so that it kind of barely tickles the needle when they're at their quietest, and then I usually don't even look at it. It usually sorts itself out after that. I don't know how hard this thing hits. I have looked at it every once in a while, but I don't worry about it unless I really hear it clamping down. And I've been liking the way that sounds. One thing I want to mention with the CLA 76, I use it in the Blackie mode or the blackface mode for live. In the studio, I usually like the Bluey one. The Bluey is a lot more aggressive, and it also, to me, sometimes the upper mids on it, it kind of pushes them out. And one of the big challenges for me with live sound, I feel like I'm always fighting the upper mids in PAs. So I'm usually trying to tame harshness and really control it. I prefer the Blackie because it doesn't push that out as much, and I don't have to put something afterwards to kind of fix what it does. It just, this is working really good for me, so I'm gonna keep using it for a while. Last thing in my chain is some kind of harmonic enhancement. Right now I'm using NLS. I've also been experimenting with using the Waves Magma BB tubes in there, and I've been liking that a lot. I usually use NLS just because I've been using it for a very long time. Before I was using NLS, when I was on the venue, I was using the Crane Song Phoenix. Part of why I have NLS in the mic setting was that gave me, I don't want to say it was the same, but it gave me it was a similar result to what I was kind of used to with the Phoenix. It had some of the same kind of vibe in it when I was using it, especially on drums. So I just kind of carried that over onto vocals. This isn't a mission critical kind of plugin that I use on vocals if I'm running out of DSP on a server. This is the first thing that's going to go. I don't need it. It's just, it's icing on the cake. One thing people have asked is, why do you put that last? Why don't you put that first? And I used to put harmonic stuff first. The thing for me, though, was I started putting it at the end because I've got all this stuff in my signal chain that is cleaning things up and polishing and refining it. And I didn't want to generate harmonics on things before I took care of all of that stuff. So that's why I moved it to the end. For example, with dynamic EQ, sometimes I might be cleaning up low mids with dynamic EQ. Well, I don't want to generate harmonics on the stuff that I'm just going to end up cleaning up, because then sometimes it creates other stuff up in the mid-range and upper mids. It's just, for me, I like it at the end. It's not a right or wrong kind of thing. This is just what works. I hope you found that interesting, maybe helpful, maybe it gave you some ideas. I'd love to hear, what is your signal chain? Leave it below in the comments. I'm always looking for new ideas and new things to try. Maybe there's another type of plugin that you like putting on there, like maybe a flanger or something. Probably not a flanger, but just hypothetically, maybe a flanger. No, probably not a flanger. But if it is a flanger, please, I want to know how you're using that. But yeah, let me know. What's your vocal chain? What works for you? If you've got questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, ideas for other videos, you can leave a comment below. You can visit me at my website, www.staglproductions.com. You can contact me through there. You can also see examples of some of the work I've done and actually hear some of the stuff. So hope that helps. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.